I was planning to build up the tension a little bit more and like say what you did and how many prizes you got. But okay.
Take all night.
It's true. I'm not going to say what you were nominated or shortlisted for because it would actually take the entire night. But you won the Guardian Prize for Literature, and you were nominated for a BAFTA for a screenplay of Hillary and Jackie, and you also got, I think, the greatest honor, the Carnegie Medal in 2004. We have a lot to talk about. You see all these books here, but I actually want to start somewhere else. And I also want to start with something that I don't know about. These are all the screenplays you wrote before you started to write children's novels and fiction. You were a screenwriter, and your first screenplay was with no other than Michael Winterbottom, for who also whose debut it also was. Now, I know how you came to children's literature, but I don't know how you came to writing screenplays, or I think before that even comedy for television in the first place. Maybe you want to tell us a little bit about your beginnings as a writer.
I was writing soap opera, and Michael had a job at a television company, and he was a trainee editor. But this was a long time ago in the days when you edited on a Steenbeck machine, like this, and the trainee's job was just to do this all day, and you became an editor when the editor died. Oh. And then you got promoted, you got off that chair and someone else did this. And so he was very bored, and I met him in the canteen and we talked about all the films that we liked. And I wrote a screenplay and we took it round together, and it took a couple of years for people to take us seriously, but we did get a little bit of money together and we made a film, then another film, then another film, then another. He never stops making films.
I have another slide that's just, I don't have anything apart from these two stills, if you can see, of the first film, which was called Forget About Me. I think it was never released on DVD. I found no poster, I found a small synopsis too.
It was a massive hit, obviously.
Maybe you can enlighten me and us a little bit about the first.
But actually, we shot that in Budapest. I think the week the wall came down, the week the Berlin Wall came down, and it was completely crazy and brilliant, and we had a wonderful time, but it was a very small film. It was really for television. Okay. So, yeah.
After this came Butterfly Kiss, Welcome to Sarajevo, The Claim, 24-Hour Party People. We're going to watch a little clip, Code 46 and A Cock and Bull Story. We can't obviously talk about all these films in detail, but what I found very fascinating is, because I watched most of them, is that there's not one genre that you tackled twice. The Claim is obviously like a Western frontier, American frontier story in the mountains. 24-Hour Party People brings us to Birmingham, to Manchester. Yeah. Oh God, what a mistake!
Now you get shot.
Don't kill me. In the 70s, and the Code 46 is a romance sci-fi film. Welcome to Sarajevo, obviously in the 90s, based on true facts and very political. How and why did you never? Did you always have? Let's make it in a positive. Put it in a positive way. Did you always have the courage to explore in your screenplay something absolutely new?
Different? Yeah. Very low boredom threshold, I think. I think it was partly to do with Michael himself, that he would make a film and think it was going to be fantastic, and then halfway through shooting he would hate that film and want to make the opposite. So we were making The Claim, that was quite a big Western in the Rockies with snow, and it was fantastic. But frostbite, and it was really quite difficult. And halfway through that, he said, I want to shoot a film back home. So I started to work on 24-Hour Party People while he was still shooting that. And then by the time he was shooting a film back home in Manchester, where all his cousins and friends could come and see me, he said, I want to shoot a film in space. So it was just like wherever he was, he wanted to be somewhere else. So I was just writing him the tickets to go somewhere else.
It's fascinating because you didn't actually shoot Code 46 in space. It looks like
No, we did. We went to space.
Oh, you did? Oh, okay, I'm sorry. Once again, I'm misinformed.
Felt like space.
If you look at the film, only the films of Michael Winterbottom, are you satisfied with the results in the sense that you see your scripts on the screen?
No, they were always much better than the script. They were always much, much better than the script, except maybe the last one I didn't, that was kind of frustrating. Mm-hmm. But I had great fun, yeah. And it always was better than the script. And particularly the two films with Steve Coogan, he's a brilliant comedian. Mm-hmm. And that was the first time I'd worked very closely with a proper comedian, and it was just amazing what they could bring to a film because they're so good at observing small things. And I think I learned a lot from working with comedians.
There is a story, it's not a cock and bull story, but it's a weird story that your name disappeared from actually the film A Cock and Bull Story, as that you invented an avatar or like took your name back. And I was asking you, can I ask you about this in front of people? Is it a sensitive issue? You just said ask, so I don't know the answer to the reason why your last collaboration with Winterbottom was without your name officially on it, but maybe you want to tell us.
It was kind of frustrating because that's based on a book which is supposed to be like the most difficult novel in the English language, which I've always really, really loved. And the very first conversation I had with Michael was, I would love to adapt this book. It's called Tristram Shandy. And he was always saying, oh, next time. And we had a bit of a falling out over Code 46. So he said, well, next time we'll definitely do Tristram Shandy. And then we kind of did it before I was completely ready. And I thought, no one's ever going to make that film again. So that was a bit sad. So we had a bit of a row, and I took my name off. It was two really strange things happened. We moved to France. My family and I moved to France straight after, and he made up a name for me because I took my name off the film, and the name was Martin Hardy. And we moved into this flat in France, and the flat opposite, there was somebody called Martin Hardy living there. It's like, that was really strange. And then it was nominated for a script award, and in the same year as Millions, which won the script award. So I was sort of double nominated, and when I went up to accept the prize, I made a speech about what a wonderful person, a brilliant writer Martin Hardy was, thinking that everyone would know that was really me. But nobody really did know that, so they were going, Frank is so nice. He's such a nice guy. So,
how big of a thing was it back then? So nobody officially knew that, or because I found
kind
it
of nobody, but in the room, because it was an industry thing, I thought everybody knew, because I thought he would have said Frank wrote it, but he didn't. So.
Let me see what my next slide is. Maybe we can just jump to going a little bit into the way that you write for film, in a way that always, it seems like in many cases there is a first-person narrator, almost like maybe.
Yeah.
But there's definitely in 24-Hour Party People, and maybe we can watch a little clip, and then if all goes well, we can see it too, and discuss this exposition. It's at the very beginning of the film, and the character of Steve Coogan sort of like fast.
Is that the beginning, really? I'm not sure.
It's where he's sitting in the and explaining
cool.
everyone.
Okay, cool.
Can we get the lights down a little bit, maybe? Maybe you can tell us a little bit about the idea of having Steve Coogan sort of like postmodernly talk to the audience, foreshadow, give away secrets, and sort of like explain the film, which sounds boring if I say it like this, but which is absolutely, completely entertaining. And I think this made this film into quite a cult classic also.
Yeah. Michael was up a mountain making this Western, and he said, go and start work on this film, 24-Hour Party People. And I think he thought it would be a film about great artistic bands like New Order and Joy Division, and which are very sad stories. People die young, and very rock and roll, all that stuff. So the first person I went to was Tony Wilson, who was the manager of a lot of these bands and of the record label and of the nightclub, the guy in the suit. And as soon as I started, I knew he had this strange double life, because he ran the biggest nightclub in Manchester and this big record label, but he was also our local newsreader. So it was the strangest thing. He would be on talking about, a coal strike in Manchester or something like that, and then in the nighttime he was this so it was always very, very strange. And he was always very smart. He was the kind of person that your mother thought was he's always so smart, but he was very kind of his own person. So I went to interview him, and Tony never stops talking. He just doesn't stop. The minute he opens the door, he's talking. He never stops. You go to the toilet, he talks to you through the toilet door. It's like, you say, I've got to go now. He follows you to the bus stop. He just didn't stop talking. And he'd sort of archived his own life. He'd kept every single ticket stub from every concert he'd ever been to. He was like the museum curator of himself. And the minute I met him, I thought, well, he is much more interesting than anybody in a band. Because people in a band, they form a band, they're wild and exciting for about 18 months. Then they get some money, then they buy a vintage car and go and live in the countryside, and it's like, But Tony was completely rock and roll right the way through, and an amazing. I'm talking too much about him, but an amazing person. And in film, the kind of the logic of film is someone is supposed to learn something. Mm-hmm. And what was wonderful about being with Tony was that he never learned anything. He knew everything, but he never learned anything. So there were big bands that he hadn't signed, like the Smiths and Oasis.
Wow.
He didn't sign those bands. And I'd say, but why didn't you sign them? Oh, they're rubbish. It's going, they'll never amount to anything. And it's going, but they're selling millions of records. And he'd say, but that doesn't matter. And then I'd say, well, what about Northfield, which is a terrible, terrible band that he spent a fortune on? He goes, they're brilliant. History will reveal that they're brilliant. It's like, so he never learned anything, and he died a couple of years ago, and I can't watch that now without feeling quite emotional about him. But he never, ever stopped talking. It was quite difficult. The last time I spoke to him, he drove past my house, and there's a very famous set of statues near my house. Mm-hmm. And he rang up and he said, "Oh, hello, darling. I've just driven past your house." And my wife said, "Oh, you should do that more often." So that was the last thing we said to him. That's quite sad, isn't it? Anyway.
But maybe let's fast forward a little bit. It's actually only 2 years, if I count correctly. When was Millions made in 24-Hour Party People?
They were kind of shot at the same time.
Wasn't it? Yeah. So I always thought, like, yesterday night I watched the audio commentary. It's a film by Danny Boyle that you all know from Train Spotting that he's making a sequel of now, I heard. Have you heard that? And Slumdog Millionaire, of course. And I always thought that you had actually written your first children's book and he read it and adopted it. Little did I know that you were actually writing the screenplay for Millions and then decided, after you've already written the screenplay, to put it into a novel.
Yeah.
Because I was watching it, I read Millions and then I watched the film. It's like, oh God, so much is omitted. And then I couldn't like, I couldn't actually have any kind of criticism of that. Maybe let's watch a trailer of that as well, sure, and then go into your other second career. This is online, the quality is so-so, but...
I haven't seen that since it was made.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
It looks quite good.
It does. It's very entertaining, and so is the book. And maybe, we can ask the question I'm sure you've been asked a million times, haha, about how you decided from going to screenwriter, very acclaimed and very also awarded screenwriter, to become a novelist for children.
I mean, I genuinely always wanted to be a children's writer because all of my heroes are children's writers. It's that, you know, the books that I read when I was 10, 11, 12 are the books that made me, the Moomin books or Edith Nesbit. They're the books that completely made me. And I'd always wanted to do it, but I kind of never had the courage. And when I had the idea for Millions, I just wrote it as a screenplay because that was my job. And nobody wanted to make that film. Nobody wanted to make that film because it's very difficult if you're European to make a children's film because, you know, if you make a thriller or a horror film, you're up against other thrillers and horror films. If you make a children's film, you're up against Pixar. You know, you're up against the military-industrial complex, and they're geniuses and they're brilliant, and it's really hard. So everybody turned it down. And there's a place in London called Delane Lee, which is it's one building, but nearly all the edit suites are in there. Mm-hmm. Editors again. And Danny was editing 28 Days Later. Mm-hmm. And you've got to imagine that there's this sort of warren of little edit suites, and at the end there's a small kitchen with a kettle and a sink and some biscuits. And while he was waiting for the kettle to boil, he noticed a script that had been left there, and it was the script of Millions. And he read the first 30 pages and decided he wanted to make the film, and he rang me up and said, I've read the whole script now, and the first 30 pages are good. But so we worked on the script together, and then when we got the money to make the film, when it was greenlit, we went out to dinner in Liverpool, and we were talking about books. And Danny is a huge reader; he reads everything, and he was sitting there talking about these books that he'd read about Kazakhstan or the Soviet meltdown or all these things, and I was sitting there going, "Yeah, and the Moomin books are great." And he said, "Why haven't you written a children's book? You should write a children's book." And I said, "Oh, I've never had an idea." And he went, two little boys find a bag of money, quite a good idea. And I literally didn't finish my pudding. I went off and started writing. I knew that I had to write it before the film came out. So I wrote it very, very quickly. Although, obviously, I'd been working on it for years as a story, but I wrote it very quickly. And it was ready for publication. I had the proofs on the last day of shoot. So I gave Danny the proofs. He read it that night. And the next morning at breakfast, he was like, I was going, what's wrong? And he went, that book's really different from the film. I said, well, books are different from films. He went, no, there's good stuff in that book that's not in the film. You kept it for your book. And he sulked.
It's true, though. It's true. That's exactly what I said. I read the book thinking it was made into a film and thought, oh, so many good bits are not in the film.
Well, he sulked so much that they gave him more money, and there's one sequence in the film that is adapted from the book. So most of the book is adapted from the film, but there's one sequence in the film that's adapted from the book.
And that is which?
When St. Peter tells a long story, which I would never have written into a screenplay because it's one actor doing a big, long speech. But Danny really loved it. And so we put that in.
Did you trust Danny Boyle to make I think he hadn't made Slumdog Millionaire.
No.
But Train Spotting and 28 Days Later, where the world turns into
land.
So
I think that script had been sent to every director in England except for Danny Boyle, because why would you send a script about a little boy who believes in saints to a man who made films about junkies and zombies?
Exactly.
It's like, oh, you're going to love this. It's like, it's on Amazon. If you love this film about junkies and zombies, you love. Like, no.
But I think, as far as I know, it was quite a success, also commercially.
Yeah, it was. We opened the same week as Star Wars in the end, so we got absolutely hammered. But it's still got life. It still gets shown a lot, and it's sort of becoming. It's on television at Christmas sometimes, and it did very well in the States. And actually, Danny always says that's the film that helped him with Slumdog because it's about two children, but also because people in the Academy really love that film because they're older people and they've got children, and so they love that film. So the right people like that film.
Let's see what my next slide is. Yeah, I found two films that, well, they're not based on your novels because it was a screenplay first. Framed is your second novel.
Yeah.
And was made into a TV film.
Yeah, TV film.
And the funny thing is, I wanted to include like two screenshots because actually Frank Cottrell Boyce is playing in those two films. Of course, yeah. And I thought it's a bit silly to do that. Framed was actually
really good.
Okay, I still have. I can look at them. Those too gaggy. Framed was a TV film that that wasn't made for the big screen, obviously. Yeah, and I just have these two slides to ask you actually about Framed and about the adoption of that, because that is the only, now that I know it, it's the only film that adopts your novel. And so, of course I read Framed too, and then saw the film and thought so much is omitted. This time I was right, but like...
And the next time, I wrote the screenplay for Framed, and then everyone kept saying to me, that was a terrible screenplay. It's a brilliant book. You've ruined that book. Oh. So everyone thought I'd done a bad job of that screenplay.
Well, you, maybe to jump to Framed, your second novel, it deals with a small Welsh village that seems very bleak. It's raining all the time, and it's told from the perspective of a young boy who every chapter starts with him painstakingly like writing down what kind of cars come, because
nothing else happens apart from cars.
Exactly, and his parents own, what do you call it, a gas petrol station.
Petrol station.
On the top of a mountain, and one day all these lorries come in, and turns out that actually the National Gallery in London has been flooded and is trying to save all the paintings in a very unusual place, which is an old mining sort of mountain. And this entire this entire book builds up the tension of what is happening there. Okay. You have a little prologue,
right?
But you'd never know, and it's told from the perspective of the boy. And then the film goes right into it. It tells you, the prologue is that you know exactly what is happening. Starts in London, actually, where the book is never set, and then also loses the perspective of the boy. Yeah. And I wonder, is that some kind of like reinvention where you go to your book and say, how can I make it different? Or do like television producers also tell you, we cannot structure a film like this?
It was just a completely practical thing, because it's very hard to make a film with children because they're only allowed to work a certain number of hours. So it becomes quite expensive. So there was like an adult story in the book, but that kind of became the main story in the film, just because even expensive adults are cheaper than children.
And Now we've been neglecting Salah Naoura. He has been,
Not at all.
Best translator in the world.
The best translator, 6 out of 9, I think.
All my books are better in German.
No.
This is the book that is not The Astonishing Broccoli Boy. We had a meeting this morning, or like an event this morning, and then you translated the bits.
I'm going to, yeah.
Yeah, and we all the kids were there, they couldn't have read it because it was in English and they couldn't speak English. So we had 4 pages translated, and he heard them for the first time being translated.
Yeah.
He was just like laughing and said, so much better in German. So you have to read it, all of his novels, both in English and in German, but he's also author of his own right. And I wanted to tell you because it's children's books, Erstlesewerke, like first
Beginning readers.
Beginning readers, what you call it, and then also proper novels, and they have such amazing titles like Konrad Krax und die telepathischen Tauben, Konrad Krax and the Telepathic Doves, Matti und Sami und die 3 größten Fehler des Universums, Matti, Sami and the 3 biggest mistakes of the universe, und my favorite, Hilfe, Oma kommt zurück. Help, Granny's coming back.
Granny's coming back, right, yeah.
So I don't know too much about the publishing business to say for a fact that it's unusual that there's one author with one translator, but I think it's not often the case that you sort of like, is it a case or is it not the case?
It's unusual to have such a good translator.
Okay. And since you're both sitting here and you've been also working and performing, if I may say so, you've been reading in English and you in German together, what kind of collaboration is that? Like, do you call Frank if you're unsure about a word, or like what kind of friendship have you developed?
No, not so often, I have to say. Well, sometimes, it occurs, but I'd rather write an email, and he's very short with his answers all the time. Just one word or 2. But no, we're not calling each other. No. Sometimes I'm writing emails, and I'm hoping to get an answer.
Yeah. I always answer, don't I?
Yes, you always do. Yes, of course, yeah. And,
I have also going back to reading the books. Some of them I read in English, some of them were given to me in German, and then one, Framed, your second novel, is called Meisterwerk, Masterpiece. Yeah. And I was thinking, wow, that's very humble of an author to call this book Masterpiece.
It's the German title, because
exactly.
The English one is Framed, and I thought it would be a nice idea, so it was my suggestion to call it Meisterwerk. I thought it was humble enough.
Yeah. it actually is a masterpiece, so it's quite fitting.
It is. Yeah.
But I was reading it in German and thought, because I do a bit of translation as well, and I thought, wow, that's difficult, because let's go back to the boy that we already talked about. There's a big sort of misunderstanding. So this art dealer comes to this boy who knows nothing of art, but knows everything about the Ninja Turtles, who are obviously, I didn't know that, are called
Raphael, Michelangelo.
Exactly. And so
Leonardo
and the gallerist thinks, wow, he knows everything about the big masters.
Yeah.
And
because he's got really strong opinions about them, and they're quite. So he has these chickens that are named after the Ninja Turtles.
Yeah.
But when the guy from the National Gallery meets them, he says, "Oh, this is Leonardo, this is Michelangelo, this is Donatello," and so that's already interesting. And then he says, I hate Leonardo, he's so overestimated. Everybody loves Leonardo, but I much prefer Raphael. So the guy from the gallery is like, wow, that's an...
And there were some bits that I thought were extremely difficult to translate. There's a Ninja Turtle song. Who knows, maybe you can tell me, who knows the Ninja Turtles, has watched them, knows their song also? I didn't actually I was always scared of them. So how difficult, for example, to translate something so iconic, like the Ninja Turtle song. Then in this town, there are all these speaking names of the shop. And one you translated with unverpackt. It's what we now have in Berlin, a shop without any sort of, where you go with your jar and you don't have any, what do you call it? The wrappings, no wrappings, no boxes, no nothing. You just get it from the bin. So maybe tell me a little bit about...
Well, to be honest, I didn't know anything about the Ninja Turtles before. I had to look it up and do a lot of research as well, because I didn't know Raffaele, Leonardo, and all these people. And because I... well, just the painters, right? Yeah, of course. But then afterwards, I just checked in the internet, of course, and then I tried to translate it as best as I could. And with these shop names, it's very often it happens that you just have to invent something new then. So it's I always put something in the place, and you should have the feeling that Frank might have invented it, and if nobody knows it or if nobody notices it, so I've been lucky. Yeah.
I learned in a seminar about translation that there's no such thing as translation. There's always a new text, which seems kind of obvious. But like as an author who's written this and got famous for their texts, how do you feel about translation? Do you do you not want to know how good, exact, creative, or
You don't want it to be exact because that's not. You want it to be a new text. You want it to be something that speaks. It's funny, you showed 24-Hour Party People, and when we made 24-Hour Party People, that was a very small film. And before that, we made what was supposed to be quite a big film, a Western. And everybody said to us, well, there's no point making 24-Hour Party People because nobody outside the northwest of England will understand anything about that. It was such a northwest of England thing. And in fact, that film is always being shown. I'm constantly getting emails and fan letters from Valparaiso and Peru and Australia. And I think it's because the more specific you are, the more universal you are. Because we are all the same. And the more you're true to a place or a time or to yourself, the more easily you speak to a lot of people. So that's the thing about that's what translators do brilliantly. So you were talking about shop names. And there's like a mad thing in England. I don't know if you do this here, but in England, small shops always have a pun in the name. I don't know why. Why is that? But so, for instance, like a small pizza shop, if you're not Pizza Express or Pizza Hut, you'll be called something like the Leaning Tower of Pizza. It's like you have to do that. I don't know why. And hairdressers and things like that. And I love those things.
Hairdressers here in Germany.
Hairdressers try to do that as well.
Hairdressers
very often. Yeah, right.
Curl up and die. It's not even a good idea, and so translating that is really, but you mustn't think about it. You must just think, what's the truest thing? And
for instance, don't be scared, be prepared. This book title.
Exactly.
This was rather tricky too. Yeah.
I actually wrote it down. There's in the Astounding Broccoli Boy, which is a story about a boy who just turns green and then becomes, or thinks he becomes a superhero. And there's a reference to the book that is called Don't Be Scared,
Be Prepared. And I changed it to Ohne Sorgen, fit für morgen. Ohne Sorgen, fit für morgen means, it should mean don't be scared, be prepared.
Okay.
Well, at least, nearly.
So you say.
And another thing that I had to laugh about, because this is actually eine Sackgasse, one way for a translator is a pun that you made. Don't count your chickens before they're hatched.
Yeah.
And you think, well, you could say, man soll den Tag nicht vor dem Abend loben, which is like, don't praise the day before the evening has come. But then it goes on, they're talking about the chickens.
Real chickens,
So you cannot not use that pun.
Yeah. That's the problem. He's always using lots of puns, and plus he is always referring to these puns in a different context. And so you have to make sure that all these contexts really work in German, and it's really quite tricky to do.
I'm sorry.
No. I love it because it's really a wonderful task. So I really love to do that. Yeah, I try, and sometimes it takes me a long time.
I also want to talk quickly about the Chitty Chitty Bang Bang books, because I was also thinking that you were brave, because no other than Ian Fleming, the inventor of James Bond, of course, wrote books that I actually read in class, in German class, and made a 2-volume thing about it, and then you wrote 3 more. So you kind of like followed into his footsteps, or like, taking on his heritage. And also, if I'm right, like the first one is Flies Again, and there is no Chitty Chitty Bang Bang in the beginning.
No,
so it is not actually a sequel, but sort of like a prequel or a reboot, if you want to speak in film terminology. Tell me something about like your motivation to like go on with that.
Well, Ian Fleming wrote the James Bond books, but he also wrote Chitty Chitty Bang Bang for his son right at the end of his life, and he had intended to write lots of sequels. So there was scope for a sequel there. And the family asked me, and I think they thought I knew a lot about cars, because there are lots of cars in Framed. And I know nothing about cars. I've driven the same car for 12 years. I sort of know how to clean it, but that's all. I know where the petrol goes. So I had these terrible conversations where I would sit there going, Yes, the 1972 Lancia. Yes, a good car. But I wanted to do it. I don't know why I wanted to do it really. But with the kids, when it was suggested, my children said, "That's a great idea. We must do that." So I just did it because for me it was a different thing to try. My children's books have been they're very, very personal. So to write about something completely different was fun for me. And also it was quite a busy time. I wrote those sort of in the build-up to the 2012 Olympic Games. So it was something you could write without sort of digging into your heart too much. You know, it was fun, and it gave me a chance to experiment with all kinds of things I wouldn't use in my own books, like time travel and villains and all those things. So it was an adventure for me.
Yeah, maybe tell us something about the Olympics that you wrote. Do you want to or not? Because I know nothing about it. No. Danny Ball directed it, and you wrote it. Now I wonder, how do you write that? I would think, like, very naively, there's a choreography, and then there is maybe a directing of that. But what a challenge is that?
Yeah, it was a challenge. I mean, we worked on it for years. A very, very, very small team. There were 4 of us. It was just great fun. It was like being back at primary school. It was really, really good fun. And if you ask me how we did it, I don't actually know anymore how we did it. It was just really different from doing anything else. You know, there had to be a sequence of events, and there were things that had to happen, like the Queen coming in. So you had to think of like a way of bringing the Queen into the stadium that was entertaining. So that's like quite a simple thing to do. And at the beginning there was, you know, you have to show the Olympic Games, the Olympic rings. So how do you show the Olympic rings in a way that's exciting and different? And most other ceremonies have just gone for bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. So we were just looking for ways to make that into a story. So for the rings, you saw the metal dug out of the ground and melted and forged into rings and then raised up. And so that was sort of very exciting. And for the Queen, we had James Bond bring her to the stadium. So just finding a new way of doing things that had to be done was really interesting.
Maybe to go back to your books and to the themes of them, one thing that struck me, because I already see you have the Unforgotten Code there. The Unforgotten Code is the most beautiful book in a sense that it's layouted very well, but also thank you to your writing. It's also the most, do I have a copy here myself? Or maybe you can I can give you a little insight into it. It's layouted as if it was a school book or a notebook, and then there are photographs, and then everything is written on it as if, you know, every page is color printed, which I found very beautiful. And it's also a very beautiful, very short story compared to your other books about something that was for me the most obviously political, in a sense that it's told from a child's perspective. There are new kids coming to town, to school, they're a bit weird, and you realize, oh, this is about foreigners, or like people being foreign, and so on and so forth. And you have a thing which I like very much, that when a story is over, you sort of give your personal input. It's over, and then after this, you know, you explain in frame that you know nothing about cars, and you explain in the Unforgotten Code that this is actually based on
a real person.
On a real person, on real events, and that, yes, if you're an adult, you must read this. This is about immigration. This is about, you know, immigration laws and people being sent back, and so on and so forth. And then I realized it's actually in all of your books an idea of this. Even in Framed, there's an exchange of the school with another school. Was it Uganda? And then in Millions, it is. We saw it briefly in the Water Aid. Like, do you like to help poor children? And there's sometimes very ironic, but still very prominent, sort of like bridge to what was once called a third world, or like, you know, another world that is, you know, not the privileged. Maybe you want to tell us a little bit about if that comes in naturally, or if this is something that you always, when you write a story, you try to incorporate in one way or another, you know? Yeah,
I mean, I'm very aware that the rest of the world is there, and especially as a children's writer, you're aware that all the great stories are all international, that they come, you know, the stories that enrich me were Emil and the Detectives, that came from Germany, but the Arabian Nights and Anansi, these stories that come from all over the world. So when it goes back to what I was saying about being very specific to a place, that you have to also be aware that your place is on a planet and that it's part of a planet. So with the Unforgotten Code specifically, the very, very first time I went into a school to read, It was my friend's school. My book had only just come out, and she said, come to our school and read. So I went, and there was this girl there called Michelle, who was from Mongolia, and her family were seeking asylum. And she was hugely popular. I said this morning she was like a Disney princess, but she just wasn't like the other children, and the other children were all enchanted by her, and she was so gracious and everything. And they were a family, and they were a very, very, very popular family. But they did things differently. So, for instance, we have this tradition that about once a term you're allowed to come to school. We have school uniform, but once a term you're allowed to come to school without a uniform, but you have to pay a fine to a charity. So it's a way of raising money.
Just for one day?
Just for one day.
Okay.
And in Liverpool's obsessed with football. So the day you come in your own clothes and not in uniform, everybody comes in football kit. Just everybody everybody's in football kit, red or blue. She came in Mongolian national costume with a crown on her head and everything. She just looked like amazing, you know. And they all really loved her, but they lost their case. And they were deported, but they were deported in the middle of the night. It was really, really horrible. And she rang my friend quite late saying, we're being taken away. Can you say goodbye to everybody for me? She was 10, you know. And my friend could hear the government person in the background saying, take the phone off the kid, which is just like, that's like something from a war, isn't it? So, and the next day that the kids went to school and she'd left her coat behind. And they were just distraught about their coat because she told them all about Mongolia and how it's cold at night and this amazing image of camels with snow on. And they were just distraught about the coat. And that story really stuck with me. Somebody asked me to write a small book with pictures in. And I had an idea about a ghost story, and I was, you know, they loved it, it was going to happen. I was on a train with the commissioning person, and I started to talk about Michelle and what had happened, and she just went, no, that has to be the book. So I wrote that down, and it sort of it asked me to write it. I didn't ask to write that story. And it was for a charity, and you know, and the book's done really well. It won lots of prizes, but it was written really quickly, and the pictures were taken by a friend and a neighbour. They're not by someone who works in publishing or is an illustrator. In fact, he's the bass player in a pop group called The Farm. But he's a kind of pocket genius, and he took these photographs, and we wanted to go to Mongolia and take photographs, but obviously there wasn't time and there wasn't money. And I said, well, when you make a film, you don't shoot the film where the story happens. You make where you are look like... So you don't go to space to shoot Star Wars. You shoot Star Wars in Tunisia.
But that becomes part of the story as well, because we're meant to believe that we are in Mongolia.
Right, that's
and all these pictures, we see something that we actually see. It's not only described, but we see the pictures printed in there, and the kids tell us.
So in the book, it's not a girl, it's two boys, which I decided because I thought Michelle's a real person and she's got her own story. And you know, one day we'll know that story. So I have to change it. So I changed it to these two boys who are quite full on. And they're quite crazy, and they have this wad of photographs that they show of their own country. But if you're a grown-up, you can tell that they're photographs of Liverpool. But they're just like Liverpool from a funny angle that makes it look like Mongolia. But that's exactly what you do in a movie. You know, you don't... If you wanted to make a movie about Berlin, you wouldn't be able to shoot it in Berlin. You'd have to go somewhere else and make it look like Berlin.
Yes,
so,
true.
There you go.
Do you want to read something?
Oh, we're going to read some.
Yeah.
Okay.
So maybe you're going to read it in German, and then you're going to read the same bit in English.
Yeah, we take turns.
You will take turns. So it's called the ping pong principle. I was told, but I've never witnessed that. But Christoph Rieger, who's sitting over there, knows a lot about it.
Do you need to say what's happened?
I'm very excited.
Yeah, that was great. Yeah.
So, because I've not read this bit before, but the teacher has sort of asked them to do a kind of science experiment, which you can do at home. It involves if you take a little film canister and blue tack some Alka-Seltzer, which is a fizzy tablet, to the bottom of the cup, then you put water in the bottom and you turn it upside down, it will explode. So she gets them to do this as science homework. You do this all the time. I can see that. It's so exciting. And when it works, it's really great. If you do it with a big canister, it goes... so she's asked them to do this as science homework, but nobody else has... They were supposed to bring in the little film canisters, but nobody's done it except for our two Mongolian boys. Is that right?
Right. Yeah.
Oh, I start?
Yes.
Can I start here?
You start here.
Okay. Oh, so all the kids come in, they haven't got any canisters, but Chinggis, who's the Mongolian boy, has got a bag full of them. He's got 30 of them in a bag. You can buy one from me for make your own rocket. 1 film canister, 1 stick of Blue Tack, 1 Alka-Seltzer, £1.
Jeder kann sich bei mir seine eigene kleine Rakete kaufen, sagte er. Eine Filmdose, ein Stück Kleber und eine Tablette für £1.
Everyone wanted one. People were pushing around, handing him money. I said, you bought them in, but you didn't tell the teacher, you didn't tell Mrs. Spendlove. Why? I'd felt sorry for her.
Jeder wollte eine haben. Die Schüler drängten sich um ihn und bezahlten. Die hattest du dabei und hast Mrs. Spendlove nichts davon gesagt? Warum? Fragte ich, weil sie mir leid tat.
He said, why would I use them in the lesson? Last night I collected all of these from the neighbors to sell.
Wieso sollte ich sie denn im Unterricht verwenden? Erwiderte er. Die habe ich gestern Abend alle bei unseren Nachbarn gesammelt, um sie zu verkaufen.
You could have sold them to us before the lesson, then everyone would have had one and she would have been really happy.
Du hättest sie doch vor dem Unterricht verkaufen können. Dann hätte jeder eine gehabt und Mrs. Spendler wäre total zufrieden gewesen.
Yeah, but before she showed us how it worked in the lesson, nobody wanted one. No one would pay £1 when they didn't know what it does. Now Mrs. Spendlove explains, everybody wants one. Her lesson was good advertising.
Bevor Mrs. Spendlove uns vorgeführt hat, wie es funktioniert, wollte niemand eine. Es bezahlt doch niemand £1, ohne zu wissen, was eine Filmdose kann. Jetzt hat Mrs. Spendlove es erklärt und jeder will eine. Ihr Unterricht war eine super Werbung.
But you bought Blue Tack and Alka-Seltzer as well as the canisters. How did you know?
Aber du hattest ja außer den Filmdosen auch noch Klebemasse und Tabletten dabei. Woher wusstest du das?
Rockets were invented in Mongolia. Propulsion is in my blood.
Raketen wurden in der Mongolei erfunden. Schubkraft liegt uns im Blut.
A lad called Baki, he's a policeman now, said, they're my canisters. You can't make me pay for my own canisters.
Ein Typ namens Baki, inzwischen ist er bei der Polizei, meinte, das sind meine Filmdosen. Du kannst mich doch nicht für meine eigenen Filmdosen bezahlen lassen.
Apparently, the night before, Chinggis had gone and knocked on every door in his block of flats, including Baki's, and asked if they had any film canisters.
Anscheinend war Chinggis am Abend zuvor losgegangen und hatte in seinem Wohnblock an jede Tür geklopft, um nach Filmdosen zu fragen, auch bei Baki.
Okay, I'll give you the canister free, said Chinggis, and the Blue Tack free too. So it's just £1 for the Alka-Seltzer.
Die Filmdose gebe ich dir umsonst, erwiderte Chinggis. Klebemasse ist auch umsonst, nur £1 für die Schmerztablette.
Okay, that's great. So, about 3 or 4 weeks ago, about a month ago, I did a talk in Liverpool, and someone came up to me and said, a young woman came up to me and said, you came to my school when I was 11 years old and you talked to us about millions. And I said, oh yeah, in what school? And she said, Joan of Arc. And I said, oh yeah, do you remember Michelle? You know, I wrote a book about her. And she said, yeah, I know. I'm in touch with Michelle on Facebook. I went, no, because we hadn't heard anything from her for 7 or 8 years. And this is her. So she grew up and it's kind of got a happy ending. And she wrote me an email a few weeks ago, so we're in touch. So after she disappeared, she reappeared. So she said, we're all quite well, but I cry all the time.
Did she get her coat back in the end?
No, well, because this is only a few weeks ago. So we're hoping to make a small film of The Unforgotten Coat. And for the end of it, what I would like to do is take someone who was in her class at primary school, we have the coat, and fly them to Mongolia to give the coat back.
Super.
So there's a real story. So we do the film about the 2 boys, and then at the end we'd explain that it was really a girl and take the coat back, and it would be
super,
really wonderful,
yeah.
I think. Yeah. So there we go.
This, the sad story about her deportation is a story that we also know here, but that is also known in other countries. But also the exact same story happened to a family of Côte d'Ivoire,
Yeah.
whose children were not even there, and like in the middle of the night, policemen came and like
Yeah.
took them there. And there's a TV documentary about this, how they don't know a word of French, have never been there,
Yeah.
but be supposed to be there.
Yeah.
It was actually the first of all the books that I read, and I thought that you might have also some kind of political agenda. Agenda is a stupid word, and message is a stupid word as well. But I had the feeling that you wanted to say something apart from writing a very touching story. And do you get involved in politics? Is maybe a little too bluntly asked. That's
Is this because, do you know, Jeremy Corbyn was on the phone just before we came out? I am involved in politics by mistake.
Not in that sense, but you know what I mean. Like, do you also use the chance to write children's or youth literature to go to places where people are supposed to, or children are supposed to think about political agendas or circumstances like deportation, immigration law, and so on and so forth, which is a very pressing topic in the UK and in Germany at the moment?
I mean, it didn't happen like that, and I think if I am political at all, it goes back to what I said about being specific, so that you have politicians who can use words like our Prime Minister called the refugees a swarm, as though they were insects. And I think all you can do as a writer is say, no, each of those people is a person, that, you know, they're every bit as much of a person as you are, and every person has their story. So that, you know, Chinggis and Nergui, the two brothers in this, they're not immigrants, they're Chinggis and Nergui. And that is really important, I think, that any policy is in the end about an individual person. And I think that's all you can do, is just keep saying, no, they're people, they're people, they're people. If you want to drop bombs on them, you have to remember that they're people. You know, if you want to put them in behind barbed wire, you have to remember that they're people, just like your kids are people, you know, and that we're all as important as each other. And I think just that naming people, and they're being very specific. And the boys in this are very individual. They're not like, you know, generic refugees. Yeah. They're very...
You don't know it also. It's just...
Yeah, you don't even know the refugees. So they kind of don't know that they are. They just know that they've got to be careful, but they don't really know why. And they're full of confidence and swagger, and they think the world built... And every time anyone says, well, what are you doing here? He just goes, well, we're nomads, aren't we? You know? It's like what we do.
How do kids react to the book? It's a big success, I think. Like you got an award for it, but also I think it sold well. So, like, do you go to a lot of readings where kids react directly to it?
Because it's slightly older than most of my other books as well. I mean, what's been good is that there's been lots of schemes. I mean, this was originally for a charity in Liverpool called The Reader, which does reading groups, but for across the board. So sometimes it's for children in hospital, but it's also for prisoners in prison and people in drug rehab and all that. And this book works across all those age groups. That's been really nice. And one of the most moving things was people, as a project, they tend to do this thing where they get a camera and say, make where you live look like somewhere different. And so that's always fun. But we did it with people in prison, and that was amazing to get a project from people in prison saying, make your prison where you're stuck look like Paris, or look like, you know, in these pictures, and see it differently.
How does that work in a prison?
Well, there's a reading group in not my prison, the prison where I am, there is a reading group, and they did The Unforgotten Coat, and they did this project, and they all got a little camera, and they had to go around the prison and make it look like somewhere different, and then they sent this project to their kids. So it was really sweet. It was a lovely thing, and that idea of like looking at your prison as though it's not a prison, which we're all like that. I mean, we all build these little prisons for ourselves. David Cameron, when he says swarm, he's locked in a story about people and what the size of his country is and all those things. And you have to break out. That's what art is for, to break you out of those prisons. Wow. Thank you.
Maybe going back to a thing you said twice now, that everything you write about is something personal, it has to have something personal in it. I find it interesting that I couldn't tell what it always is until you say it in a context. Okay. Like the new book that he's written, The Astounding Broccoli Boy, for example, like how personal can a story about a boy who turns green all of a sudden has a nemesis who also turns green, and they're locked up in a hospital ward and get tested by a weird nurse and a weird doctor every day, and then go and wreak havoc in London, be a personal thing. But it also is.
Yeah. Do you want me to say one?
I was just thinking, like, should I say it or do you want to say it?
Shall I tell that whole story that I did this morning? Or have we got time?
I think we do, yeah.
Okay, on my first day at school, do people know what a Dalek is? No, okay. Right, on my very first day at school, I was very nervous. Went to school in the middle of Liverpool. I loved living in Liverpool, but it was quite tough. And my mother convinced me that a really good idea would be if I wore a bow tie to school. Right? And it wasn't a good idea. So as soon as I walked into the playground, every head just went, there's a kid in a bow tie. I can't wait for morning break. You know? And I wouldn't go in. And my teacher came out to get me, and my teacher was a nun who had this big wimple and a skirt that went down to her feet. So when she came to get me, she just sort of moved like this kind of weird robot. And I just couldn't believe that my mother was trusting me to this kind of weird robot, this Irish robot. So I did this terrible thing. I kicked a nun. And I kicked a nun hard, and I kicked a nun over and over, shouting, "What's inside it? What's inside it?" And at morning break, nobody came to play with me, which I thought, that's obviously because nobody goes to school thinking, I hope there's a nun-kicking, bow-tie-wearing kid to play with. But it was because that I turned bright yellow, and I have a blood disorder whereby if I get very stressed or if I get a little bit sick, I turn really bright yellow. And I can't feel it happen, but other people, I know it's happened because people are going like this at me in the street. And so that thing of changing colour has always been part of my life. And do you know, every single time I've sitting down to write a children's book, I've intended to write that story and never, it's always sort of changed into something else. And this is the first time I'd ever seen it through, but it's actually the most personal thing I've ever written, really.
As I said before, you sort of explain the coherences or the motivation after the book is over. Why? Or did you think about also, you can look at it from two perspectives. I like it a lot, but it also explains something very personally. It seems like you have a wish or even a need to explain the personal sort of interrelation between that story and your own story, not to justify it or verify it or anything, because it's very far away from it, but you do, and it's in a way very beautiful. But did you ever think about not doing it and then maybe having different value to it, like leaving it mysterious?
I don't know why I do it, actually. I've no idea why I do it, but I know that I did it in Framed and people really liked it in Framed. And then in The Unforgotten Coat, it felt urgent. It felt important to say that this terrible thing had happened to this real kid. And that seemed like part of the story. And part of the story even was the fact that I'd changed it into two boys, because I wanted to say, this story belongs to somebody else, that it belongs to Michiel. I don't know. I until you asked me, I'd never thought about it. I hadn't really noticed myself doing it, but I always liked writing that bit as well. I don't know why.
There's if I can talk more about, because we had this broccoli talk today, but then they were really, really young, and there were some things that we were boiling it down, I think is what the expression you use. And there are these two characters in it. So these kids are in this ward, and there's this crazy nurse, but also this kind of wacky doctor, who's like, would you mind reading that? This is my favorite part, and I was reading it in public, and that was a big mistake because everyone thought I was the ladies and gentlemen.
See, this is so real. This is the bit that is completely me, and also one of my children has the same disease, and that you would go to A&E, the bit where you're kind of admitted into hospital, and the minute you walk in, everyone would just go, because everybody else has got a broken arm or a cut, but you're bright yellow, and every chair just goes like this. So there's a long conversation with a nurse who doesn't even look up. So until she looks up, she just goes, and then the doctor comes down. And you want me to read this bit?
Yeah, well, it starts here and it just ends here.
Okay.
Maybe. Until here.
Okay, so they're waiting in A&E, and they're made to hide behind a curtain so they don't frighten anybody else. And then the doctor comes down and pushes the curtains open and goes, and brings them out, because she's going to take them up to the ward. And everybody in A&E looks, and she says, "Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to assure you that there is no need to panic." And the moment she said that, everybody panicked. People shuffled, they limped, they sidled towards the exit, chairs were knocked over. the kid with the pan stuck to his head kept saying, "What's happening? What's happening?" It was as though we were emitting some kind of force field of fear. Whenever I say don't panic, the doctors whispered in my ear, people panic. I love that. Do you want this one? Or just
thinking about that.
Just that, okay.
You want to? So, how many of the characters, because like in your first novels it was always the young boy, Millions and Framed, and then now also these like hilarious sidekicks.
Yeah.
Like how many of them, like you just said it, that there are people like this, like
Yeah.
like is the nurse, for example, is that doctor based on someone, or like do you take someone in essence of someone, like heighten it for the comedy value maybe of it, or like in Framed we have this Welsh village and it is hilarious what kind of characters are in there. There's a bank robbery, but everyone knows everyone, and this guy has a helmet with a turtle on and the bike is there, so everyone knows it's him, but he's trying to disguise his face.
Yeah.
So he's, I think, called Dumb Ralph or something like this. And then there are two ladies. They're very old. One of them is blind and one of them can't drive. So they always drive the car together. One is steering.
They're real.
And they are real.
Yeah, they're real people. There's an old couple who they're sisters and they live up the mountain. They have a big car. And one of them learned to drive, but she became blind. And the other one never learned to drive, but she can see. So they drive like this. The one who can see steers and the other one drives. It's just a terrifying thing. Do you want me to read that little paragraph about the robbery?
Oh, that would be fun, yeah.
Okay. A man came into the garage with a balaclava, that's a thing, over his face and a huge sledgehammer and shouted at Dad to empty the till. Dad knew who it was right away. It was Daft Tom. He knew because Daft Tom's mum had knitted me the very same balaclava for my birthday. Also, Tom had customized some eye holes for himself, and the wool was beginning to unravel in the nasal area, so you could nearly see his face anyway. Dad pretended to empty the safe. It's got a time lock, he said, so take a couple of minutes, stay calm, help yourself to whatever you like from the sweet rack. Just move it, Mr. Hughes. This was another clue, the robber calling Dad Mr. Hughes. The final clue was the big blue mountain bike, which is the only big blue mountain bike in town, and which everyone remembers Daft Tom winning in the Christmas lights raffle. Anyway.
I also wanted to open it up for audience questions. If you have some right now, you can ask about any film, about any book if you want to. Usually the kids are very fast and the grown-ups always need a minute, so I'm having an awkward pause until finally someone. Well, anyways, there are two microphones, two of our colleagues standing there. If you have a question, you want to ask anything. See, it works.
I've covered everything.
You said that the Unforgotten Code worked for all ages. Which other books would you say that they are for older children, let's say, or young adults?
I mean, young adult has sort of become a genre, and it means like dystopia.
Okay, I don't. So I mean, 15 to 18,
yeah,
19
I mean,
year olds.
my ideal reader is someone reading it with somebody else. Like my dream reader is a parent or a carer or a big brother reading it to a younger child. That's my. I mean, I get letters from adults who really enjoy. I mean, they're comedy. Comedy doesn't really age. They're not kiddie in that way, are they? But Unforgotten Code feels a little bit older because the narrator is a grown-up looking back at something that happened in the past. But they're for any age, really. I mean, certainly Millions. I get lots and lots of letters from adults about Millions.
Talking, yeah.
I knew you were going to... Yeah, I'm working on a new book. I wrote some this morning. You have to write a little bit every day, so I am working on I'm always working on a new book, but yeah. I mean, this is what I do now. I've still got films. In fact, I'm making a film of Cosmic, I hope.
Wow.
Yeah.
It's my favorite.
Yeah, it's brilliant.
I know you know.
Yeah. But
what is it called?
The Cosmic?
Cosmic is galactisch.
Yeah, but that already exists. Did you say the title of the book you're working on? Did you just say
the
that?
book I'm working on? Oh, I don't know what the title is. I'm so bad at titles.
Is it this one? Because I found this on Wikipedia and I don't think it exists yet.
No, I don't know what that is.
Okay.
Would you recommend reading the book Millions before watching the movie, or the other way around, maybe?
I don't know, Salah. Well, you should answer that one. Oh, you've never seen? Salah's never seen the movie. There you go.
No, I never saw the film. No, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I think you should read the book first.
I think so.
Yeah, definitely.
I think so.
Yeah.
But I think it really doesn't matter, because sometimes I love a book and then I read the book and then I see the film, and vice versa. So it really doesn't matter, because sometimes they're very different and I like them both. So, but it's a very personal decision.
I think people assume that a writer likes the book more than the film. So when the Millions film came out, teachers and librarians kept coming up to me saying, I saw the film, the book is much better. It's like, well, I worked 6 years on that film. Yeah.
And how many
Shut
days
up.
on the book?
Yeah, like 10 days on the
10
book.
days on the book.
But you know, it is a compliment, because I mean, what you have to do is like you have to cut. You cannot have every detail. You cannot have every of these brilliant stories are framed in the movie frame, because there's a limitation. You know, you don't want a 4-hour children's film. And so, I mean, do read the book first, like all of them first, I guess. Is there? Can I ask? Oh no, there's a question.
Do I have a favorite? That's like asking me, do I have a favorite child? I mean, they're so personal. They're so different. I mean, I do genuinely love Cosmic because it's just set in space and it's so great and everything. And I do genuinely love this book. But the one that I'm writing at the moment is like the first really enjoyable writing experience I've had for a long time, because I find writing very, very difficult. And the book that I'm writing at the moment just seemed to pop into my head. I was out walking with my daughter and described like a scene to her, and she just went, that's brilliant. And it's just been really easy to write. And that hasn't happened to me for a long, long time. So it's probably going to be a terrible book, isn't it? But, they're very different, you know, they're such different experiences.
Can I ask you?
Yeah.
How long did it take you to translate the unforgettable book?
This one, I think it was rather quick, so a couple of weeks. Yeah, because it's really not. It's got a few pages. How many are they? Just check.
Like 90?
It's much shorter than the other books.
It's about 100 pages, so it was rather quick. But I don't really remember. So, yeah.
Is there one book that you wish was made into a film?
Well, I mean, I'm working on a film of Cosmic, but obviously that's like, because that Cosmic, for people who don't know, is about a boy who has a huge growing spurt, and that's based on a friend of my son who had one of the, a growing spurt. Does that make sense? When a boy suddenly becomes a lot bigger, and my son had a friend who used to come and knock on the door every day and say, "Is Benedict playing out?" And two nice boys. Then we went away. We lived in France for a year, and when we came back, this boy had this huge growing spurt. So there was a knock on the door, but it wasn't. It was like the door, and it's like, "Hello, is Benedict playing out?" It's like, and Benedict was like, and I thought, oh, wow, that is a great, because all the best stories are kind of what if, what if you found a bag full of money, or what if you turned green? And I thought, oh, what if you were really huge, and you were 11 years old, but you looked like a grown-up? But all the things that I thought would be cool, I'd kind of done by about page 40. He steals a car, he gets to test drive a Porsche, so he ends up in space. He ends up on the space program and ends up as an astronaut. And I don't know, why am I talking about this? Oh, so obviously that's a much bigger movie. It's going to be very expensive to shoot something in space. But one of the people who's interested in the film and has been kind of helping a little bit with the film is Elon Musk, who's a guy who runs SpaceX, which is the first kind of private enterprise space thing. They launch rockets. He has real rockets. He has his own rockets. So he's kind of been involved in that film. So the film sort of looks like it might happen, but it's obviously a much bigger film than the other films, and so it might not happen. It's not. You can't make a film happen on that scale. But I'm working on it at the moment, and it's looking good at the moment. There's a question at last.
It's a translation question. Are your books as successful in other countries as they are in Germany?
Oh, I don't. Hi.
Hi.
I just
Very
recognised
nice
you,
to
yeah.
see you again, Frank.
It's very nice to see you. I don't know, actually. I do well in the States. Do you mean in translation?
Yeah, in translation.
I don't know. I always get loads of letters from South Korea for some reason. They're always very precise, and they're always pointing out mistakes in the book. But I get a lot. And they produce these very lavish and very beautiful books. And yeah, but I think Germany's the best. I just think because Salah is the best translator. Seriously, I do think that. You're the only one I have a lot of contact with. And I think that makes a difference. And yeah, anyway, there you go.
Thank you.
Hugh, the last screenplay you did is The Railway Man, I think, right?
Yeah.
It was put into a film with, of course, it's put into a film because of a screenplay, but with Nicole Kidman and
Colin Firth.
Yeah, Colin Firth, exactly. And what about this sort of thing? Is there a balance thing between?
No, this film was written like 15 years ago. It's a really long time. Films take forever. You know, it's very easy to write a screenplay. It's very hard to get a film made because you're asking for a lot of money. So with The Railway Man, I wrote it. It's a true story. I met the man. I thought it was an amazing story. I wrote the screenplay. Well, in fact, I'll tell you a story. Okay, the first time I met the man, my daughter was very ill. She was in year 6 in school. She was 10 years old. She wanted to go on the school trip. And I said, well, I'll go with you on the school trip. And this is about a man who was a prisoner of war of the Japanese in the Second World War, and he was tortured. And his kind of the strange thing about him is he's obsessed with railways, but he worked on this terrible project that the Japanese had called the Death Railway, where they made people build a railway and they were worked to death. But he survived, but carried on being obsessed with railways. And he was an amazing person. So the first time I met him, my daughter, I took her to this school trip. I got on a bus in the countryside somewhere and went to the nearest station. And I arrived at Eric's house, which was sort of more or less in Scotland, quite late. And I knocked on the door and said, I'm so sorry. I had to start my journey in a little village in Lancashire called Rufford. And he said, oh, right, so that's Rufford to Burscough Bridge to Salford, Salford to York, York. And he told me all the trains that I'd got straight off the top of his head. So that really stuck in my mind, right? So she was 10. And when the film came out, by the time the film came out, she was a married woman with a baby. We had to organise a babysitter. Okay. So that's how long it took to get the film made.
Wow, okay.
So it's not like I'm trying to balance writing new screenplays. It's just that sometimes you've written something a long time ago and it finally comes together. So you carry on having meetings and things. But
how many old screenplays are there still in
I've got a film that will go this year about football with Colin Farrell and Brendan Gleeson, 2 Irish actors in it, and then Cosmic, and that's it then, I think.
But will you write new ones?
If Danny wants to write one, I'll do anything. And I've been working on a film with Danny for a long time, but he's doing Trainspotting 2 now, so I've got a break.
You could do it, couldn't you? Or is he going to write it himself?
What, Trainspotting 2?
Yeah.
No, I don't want to do that. No.
Are there any more questions or comments?
The film that I was working on with Danny is set in Berlin.
Which one?
Well, I can't tell you what it is.
Ah, okay. Ah.
But we came to Berlin a few months ago, just before he shot the Steve Jobs film. And we spent a week in Berlin, supposedly looking at locations. But in fact, when we got here, the hotel room was so nice that he wouldn't go out.
That's why you said you don't have to be in Berlin to shoot a Berlin
Yeah,
film,
exactly.
Right?
Yeah,
it's just
yeah.
that's the only point I would disagree
I was going,
with.
shall we go and look at the Reichstag? And he was going, no, look at this chair. It's fantastic. Let's sit here, watch a film.
Okay. Any final questions, comments from the audience? There is, yeah.
It's on. Okay, I'm sorry. Do you have the feeling that it changed your character or your view on the world, that you are so famous now? do you think that being a writer 20 years ago, you were happier? You were you were more by yourself, expressing yourself? Is anything
Well,
changed you because
I mean,
of your that
a famous
reputation?
writer is not really famous. You know, it's a different kind of fame. It's a sweet kind of fame because you meet people for whom your work means something. Like, I used to work in television, and people were just famous because their face was in the living room. They were great actors, but their face was in the living room. And people... Well, actually, making The Railway Man with Colin Firth is super famous in England anyway. And The King's Speech, he won an Oscar. That's a terrible thing to happen to somebody. You know, every time we got out of a car or we walked into a restaurant, people would just get their phone out and take a picture of him as though he was a large animal. You know, it was as though he was wildlife, and I would hate that, you know. But nobody, I mean, even if you're J.K. Rowling, people don't really recognize you. They'll come up and say, I read this and it was beautiful. But they don't just recognize you as something to take a photograph of. So that's never really bothered me. And also, I've served my time. Like, nobody is less famous than a screenwriter. Like, that is a real lesson. That's years and years of real humility, being a screenwriter. I had 2 films in competition at Cannes, which is such a huge thing and fantastically exciting. And you get out of your car, and it's so thrilling, and you're with your wife, and you're dressed in these fantastic clothes, and you get off, you get out of your limousine at the Palais, and you walk up the red carpet, and the actor is going up before you. Every camera goes, and then as you go up, all the cameras go down again. So it's like a Mexican wave of indifference. It's like you learn that you're nothing. So, which is fantastic. Famous Ben Hecht, who's the greatest film writer who ever lived, said, it would be easier to become famous for riding a tricycle than for being a screenwriter.
What kind of advice do you give your kids for the future? Like, do they want to become writers as well?
No, my kids are all like very political, and they're not interested. I mean, they read a lot, and in fact, my younger children are very, very involved in my books. They read all the drafts, and they have loads of, and they're who I talk to. But my older kids have got, you know, they want to save the world, and they think writing books is a very slow way to do that.
But one of the co-writers of the Astounding Broccoli Boy is actually sitting over there.
He is my editor.
He invented the idea of the chocolate cookie.
Oh, you did? Yeah, I forgot about that. The chocolate frisbee.
Frisbee, yeah.
Yeah.
So give him a round of applause. If there's nothing more to say, I want to thank the heirs of James Krüss and Kirsten Rickmers-Liebau for organizing this, for doing this, for having us here. I want to thank Salah for being here and translating so beautifully. And last but not least, the wonderful Frank Cottrell Boyce. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Could I say one thing, which is that when I won the James Krüss Award, I went to the International Children's Library in Munich. It's the most beautiful library I've ever been in. You're so lucky in this country to have such a beautiful, open-hearted library, and if I can do anything back home to do something like that, I would be so proud. It's an amazing, amazing thing, and thank you, Germany.